welcome once again to another LGW Frontline Conversation. We're thrilled today to have Lyles Carr with us, a member of our first class from 1987. And he is also the person we are honoring this year as our Man of the Years at our Celebration of Leadership on October 12th. So Lyles, welcome. Great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Doug, I'm very pleased to be here, although I will note the end of the leader of the years as opposed to man. You know, mostly women are leading that charge. So I'm happy to be the honoree this year. I'm actually humbled and candidly more than just a bit embarrassed, because I think there are so many members of leadership of Greater Washington who are more than deserving of any kind of an honor. But it raises dollars for the organization. It highlights the organization and the impact that our members are having. So
there's a whole crew that would disagree with you on that, but you'll hear about that on October 12th. So anyway, let's talk about, this is a 30th anniversary Frontline Conversation. It's a Leader of the Year's Frontline Conversation, and it's let's get to know Lyles Carr. So let's talk about your first days with LGW. How did you find out about it? I mean, it's a brand new organization. And what made you want to become part of the first class?
Well, it's interesting. I got involved in the Board of Trade actually in probably the early 80s, probably about 1983 or 84. A friend of mine, Tony Gould, was on the membership committee, and I think he needed a scalp, if you will, somebody to join to keep his membership. And there I was. And back then, organizationally, we didn't join things. It just wasn't our go-to-market methodology, but I felt this was important, and so I just started writing the checks for myself on behalf of the organization. And I didn't realize when the membership manager sidled up to me and said, "You ought to be on the membership committee," that was the beginning of my demise. All of a sudden, of course, I said yes. And I also didn't realize that whoever sold the most memberships in that year was automatically the chair the next year. And there I was, right? And once I ended up as the chair, it seemed to me that we ought to get more professional about it. And so we sort of created a sales management team and a sales force. And lo and behold, we tripled the amount of dues that had ever been raised. And for that, I got to do it again the next year. But it sort of gave me some visibility as a little fish in a very big pond. I ended up serving on this and that committee, mostly to do fundraising. And I was looking for something more meaningful, more substantive, where I could really have a level of impact. Well, lo and behold, Bob Gray, who was then the executive vice president for the Board of Trade, grabbed me one day and said, "We've got this program called Leadership Washington back then, and you should apply." And they sent me the application. And, I looked at it and sat on it and didn't turn it in. And the day before the deadline, Bob called and said, "Where's your application?" And I said, "Bob, I've looked at that application and there's no way in the world I'm going to get selected. I'm just not worthy of any of this. I'm a little fish, small company, and I don't handle embarrassment well, so I really don't want to get turned down." So he said, "Turn in the application." And so I did, and there I was. And I recounted the story of wanting to get more deeply involved in something in the community where I could have an impact at our opening retreat. And my friend Myra Gossens, jumps across the table, latches herself on me like some kind of a lamprey, and said, "Have I got a deal for you? You need to know about Jubilee Housing." And I said, "Myra, I just met you. I'd like to get to know a little bit more about the community and other things and our fellow classmates before I start just jumping into things." But of course, subsequent to that, I did, and I succeeded Myra as the president of the Sports Foundation for Jubilee Housing. But I was really looking for something where I could get more deeply, intimately involved, and again, have a level of impact, because I felt otherwise I'm just going to, it's superficial. I'm floating on the surface, just dabbling in this and that and the other.
So that was your expectation heading into your class year? That's going to give you entree into other organizations, a way to have more of an impact in the region?
Yeah, it was really, I say it now, but I mean, LGW, I thought at the time, was all about educating us about the issues and resources of the region. Now, subsequent to that, I realized that in reality, under the guise of that, it's raising our consciousness to what needs to be done, and most importantly, connecting with us with the other leaders in our class, and then the leaders in the classes that came after, which is really the crucial thing. But I really needed to know more about what was happening in the region, what the region was all about, and the people that were engaged in bettering the quality of life for everybody in this region.
So please talk to me about the friendships you made, the connections you made with people in your class. There's the 6-pack, later become the 8-pack.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Did you think that at the end of the year you would be sort of lifelong friends with your classmates?
No, I hadn't. I was thinking more about issues, and this was a 1 year. Just Don Graham and I used to talk about this all the time. That it was a 1 year program, right? And you do the program, and then you go out into the community and better informed, better educated, and do good, right? It wasn't about how do I connect with those people and stay in touch, kind of thing, right? But as it turns out, that's what happened. I had a professor actually in school who told me that over my lifetime, I would only have 3 or 4 or 5 truly good friends. These are the kinds of people who would put your interest in front of their own. Well, I've got a dozen of them in my Leadership Greater Washington first year class. 8 of us, they called the 8-pack. It started as 6, all of whom were bachelors, and I think they were perhaps catting around somewhat. And they decided they needed a little bit more legitimacy. And so they grabbed me and Ray Alfred and decided we're now the 8-pack. And this was 4 black guys and 4 white guys. And we met together religiously for dinner once a month for 25 years. And I mean, at one point, Art Schultz was one, and he gave a kidney to his son and needed to convalesce. Well, Art was a bachelor. He convalesced for 6 or 8 weeks at Paul Rothenberg's house, right? One of the others, business had a little bit of difficulty, and one of the guys who was a terrific CFO financial person basically signed on full time to let's help make this business happen, right? And it did. Corwin Malloy once wanted to write about us, and we told him he could come to dinner, but he couldn't write it because it was just too intimate. I mean, we could talk about anything. There was a bond of trust that allowed us to raise any issue we wanted, and candidly, occasionally be called out by each other on our approach to issues or people or anything else. And so, I mean, those, and then it subsequently expanded. That was all male, and we had a few others, Janet Oots and Myra Gossens and Stock for 3, who said, you need to smarten up your group. We're adding women.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Myra Gossens would love to sort of hear your explanation of that.
Yeah.
What made you? I mean, it's obvious to me, but all of a sudden you're 8 men, and
well, they're hard to say no to begin with.
Well,
but I mean, they basically said, you're in an intellect. You probably are something of an intellectual desert, and we can make you smarter, and you're expanding the group. And we sort of said, well, of course we are.
And that was true. They did bring a lot of
it turned out to be very true. The intellectual level of the conversations went up by at least a couple of 3 notches. But we're all very, very close and stayed that way. Let's say it's 25 years. And unfortunately, 4 of our group have died in the meantime, and we're still close, but we haven't continued the dinners. And that's just that group. I mean, but anybody, I mean, Wayne Curry, Mark Griffin, Elliot Fansteel. I mean, they're just anybody in that. They're just the number of relationships and friendships that are truly rich, and that I know if I called and asked something, they would respond, and for sure, if I got a call from any of them, whatever they need, if I can do it, they're going to get it.
So you went through the class year, then you helped, I guess, recruit people for the next class. And at some point you became chair of LGW.
Well,
how did that happen?
Well, it's sort of interesting. And I didn't actually help recruit people for the next class. Again, we thought it was just a year, right? But we created an alumni association because back then it was just the program. And so we decided, I mean, in our class, we were supposed to end at 5 or 5:30 or something. And we decided we never got home on the same day we left. I mean, we just decided that wasn't enough. We wanted to keep talking. So we created our own social committee to continue the program. And we continue in the same sort of thematic area of that day, you know, politics or whatever it was. And then we'd end up dancing at Kilimanjaro till they closed the place. And we probably had 2/3 or 3/4 of the group that would go. But so we realized that this was something special and we shouldn't just all disperse after that program year. So Alumni Association, Diane Flanagan Montgomery was the first president. And you can blame my involvement on Michelle Higgins because we had an election for vice president. And it was a tie, me and one other of my APAC friends actually. And Michelle broke the tie, and stunningly, she broke the tie in my favor. And so I became the first vice president, which led to being the second president of the Alumni Association, just at the time when we were contemplating the change from a program year on Alumni Association to the leadership, the membership that we understand today. And so I happened to be the person on behalf of the alumni that was most involved with sort of negotiating with the quote unquote old guard that had formed us, okay, for this new structure. And this subsequently ended up, back then we had presidents. The structure, we had a program director who was Felicia Hatton, who was terrific, and a loaned executive from the Board of Trade, Lori Cedar being the first, Gary Curtis was one, who functioned more or less as executive director, sort of, but it was really just, they were a vice president of the Board of Trade. And so they brought that resource to the table, but we had presidents and supernumerary chairs like a Don Graham or a Bill Harris or a Del Lewis. And as you know, the structure changed eventually so that we'd have a chair and then a CEO, and on forward. But for probably 3 or 4 or 5 years after we moved to the membership model, we still had that same president and program director structure. And I ended up in probably about the 5th year or so becoming president. It was the logical next progression. I had been program vice chair, I'd been program chair, the sort of the next, I'd been alumni chair. Okay, so let's make him president. They needed
any highlights or lowlights from those years? Any highlights or lowlights from those years as president?
Well, I think the highlights were helping through the transition. And John, in a terrible Board of Trade, brilliant leader.
John Tidings.
John Tidings. And I actually wrote the bylaws for that first group. And it gave me the opportunity to the structure, frankly, because the old guard didn't really want to give the keys to the asylum to the inmates unsupervised. And we knew we didn't have any real resources, so we didn't want to let them get off the hook either. And so we had a structure that had 5 at-large board members who were not graduates of the program. And they were really luminaries. Charles Overby, who ran the Freedom Forum at the time, Linwood Holton was on there, and it gave me the highlight was the opportunity to sit down with each of them and say, I don't want to overburden you, but I don't want to underutilize you either. So what kind of contribution do you feel you can make? And I was at lunch with Charles, who said, and we, by the way, our entire budget then was $70,000 total. And Charles said, well, first off, we're a foundation. Why don't we give you 20 grand? And I started to tear up. I mean, it was, money was scarce back then. And plus you got the run of our facilities and those things. And with Linwood was great. He said, well, I'm running the Center for the CIT, Center for Innovation out in Reston. And I need to focus on that. So I really can't do fundraising and I don't want to come to meetings. I'll come to a meeting if you tell me I have to, but I don't really want to. He said, but you can use my name without asking me, and I'll call anybody you want me to call. And I said, Linwood, we have a deal. But it was just the opportunity to meet those people, and candidly, from a personal level, it sort of put me on a different level in terms of connections and people that I knew. But I think that transition and was a real highlight. And apart from highlights of the program, I mean, I could talk forever about the various things we did in our program year, but I think that was a big highlight. Low light, frankly, was we had some real growing pains that I didn't realize. I mean, I think underpinning was racial, and I'm colorblind, candidly. I only over the years got more focused on diversity. Shirley Chisholm once said, forget melting pot, go for tossed salad, and appreciate all the various ingredients that make up that salad and make it so much more rich and robust. And so you can't ignore the difference, right? In fact, you've got to reach out and embrace the difference and understand how it all comes together and be more attuned to that, right? And so over the years, that's definitely how do we make sure that we have all the various people who ought to be at and around the table and who ought to have a voice. How do we make sure they're there? Because that's so much richer. But at the time, I was totally oblivious and didn't realize that during this growing period, it was going to be difficult. And it was. I mean, there was a time when our executive committee, which was me and Julie Rogers and John Tidings and Shereen Dotson, a town meeting, and honest to gosh, if they'd had tar and feathers, they would have put them all over us and taken us out of town on a rail. And artists came in and sort of saved the day as the succeeding president. But that was a difficult period.
Artist Hampshire County.
Absolutely.
From another class.
From the third class.
And did you reach out to her, or did she come and say you got a problem?
No, I don't recall how at that point we picked our presidents. But it wasn't me. It wasn't. I didn't. It was. But boy, she was a wonderful choice to sort of bring us all back together and create the kind of understanding that I think for the most part we have today, which is so crucial. It's something I'm actually going to talk about during the celebration, that we're so divided. Our country, politically, economically, racially, it just we need to move forward together. I think that's what LGW is all about. How do we connect and understand and appreciate each other? Anyhow, another big highlight, by the way, was that we managed to wangle I guess it was the 1994 national conference here, and which was terrific. We were already on the map. They knew about us We had some leading edge things in terms of publications and how we were doing membership and various things, but that gave us sort of this national credibility as well as one of the real leading organizations in the whole leadership movement across the country.
And your class name was, or is?
Well, it was a spoof. We are embarrassed by our class name because it's We Came First, which was not intended to be. Although we do say that there was, it's like on a luxury liner. There's first class, second class, third class, and then there's steerage. But that's not really what we were trying to say. We were trying.
But you set the standard for arrogant class names, I think.
Well, believe me, it was not intended. Had we realized that there were going to be class names, we would have never come up with that name. But nonetheless, that was it.
But I want to get back to LGW and the future LGW towards the end of this conversation. But if we could, let's switch to you. I mean, tell us about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What was your early life like, and what got you to the point of getting to the Board of Trade?
Well, I was born in Easton, Maryland, over on the Eastern Shore, which is where my accent comes from, and my family, been around a long time, in the late 1600s over there, the 1668 on this side of the bay, around Lothian. Carr's Hill down in Lothian is part of my forebears, and yet I was the first one to go to college, to graduate from college. Interestingly, my mother's people were all watermen. I mean, boat captains. My great grandmother ran a boarding house for fishermen and hunters and that kind of thing. And I grew up in grade school in Palmer Park. We were the first family into the second section of Palmer Park, which at the time, this is 1957, was the farthest outlying suburb of Washington, D.C. I took music lessons on Minnesota Avenue. I went to church in Seat Pleasant. Had I not gone off to school, Wayne Curry and I would have been classmates at Bladensburg. We didn't realize that. And my father founded what at the time was the third largest stock brokerage house in the city, and ended up going broke fighting with the SEC to a tie, which is not very good, because you go broke in the process. But I watched, and I didn't realize at the time, but we were bused to school. I went to Glendale Elementary, and then Linden Hill, and then Kent Junior High School, which is now a police substation in Palmer Park. And then I went off to school. I was a third generation of Episcopal High School, which is about the only way I would have gotten in, I think. And Bowie came about, and Bowie basically sucked the middle class, and was largely the white middle class, out of the inner part of the city. And I realized that only after the fact that I'd seen the complexion and composition of that area change almost overnight. And I didn't understand it or appreciate it. I mean, when I was 11 years old or something at the time, but on reflection, I certainly do. And I understand what happened and the end result. But that influenced me a lot. I mean, I got to Episcopal, and I was sort of the kid from the wrong side of the tracks, right? And because I wasn't Southern gentility, I didn't have that blue blood kind of thing. I mean, I'd been raised in what became a little bit of a rough neighborhood, but a very mixed neighborhood in terms of racially. And I just thought of other kids I knew, black, white, or brown, as just other kids, right? There wasn't any segregation as far as I could see in the schools where I attended or the people I played baseball with or those sorts of things. But in retrospect, I understand sort of demographically what happened. But that I look back and that had an influence, and I realized, frankly, because I was 2 years at Episcopal, and then I thought I was in the wrong place, and I went home for a year, and it cost me a year because I ended up going back to Episcopal and realizing then what I was missing, why I was there, and the privilege that I had in that kind of education. And so, candidly, my father, one of the key things he did was try to help young Black men. It was all boys back then at Episcopal, have that same kind of opportunity. And I picked up on that as well. And so over the years, I've tried to channel and support a number of young Black men into that same opportunity there, and understanding that that opportunity educationally and in terms of the relationships opens up just so many things that come with that, frankly, that kind of privilege.
So where'd you go off to college?
At the University of Virginia, I was on my way to Princeton. I didn't realize you applied to more than one school back then. And I was a multi-sport athlete and had some pretty good grades, and my SATs were worthy.
Wait. Let's go back. You were a multi-sport athlete?
Yeah.
Let's get into that. Come on, let us know.
Well, football, wrestling, track, swimming in the summer.
Jeez.
But yeah.
You were a jock, Lyles. You were a jock.
Yes, I actually am a jock, or was. And I chose Princeton because it had the best wrestling team in the Ivy League. And so off I was going to go, and I got recruited to UVA. Harley Ferguson, who was a captain of Episcopal a number of years before I went there, and was captain at Lehigh when Mike Caruso, three-time national champion, was there. And Mike had gone down to UVA to really put life into a wrestling program. And Harley used to come and work out with me on the weekends, and it was terrific. And so he said to Mike, "There's this kid up in prep school you ought to grab." And they got me down there on a party weekend. And what can I say? That was that. And plus, there's sort of a pipeline. Episcopal used to be the high school and then the university, and you go one to the other. And it turned out to be a wonderful choice. And particularly in the fraternity I joined the second year of Open Rush, a Jewish fraternity, as against where all my cohorts had gone, St. Anthony, St. E's, Phi Gam, which was the wrestling fraternity. And boy, those guys have been lifelong friends and true brothers ever since. But yeah, so I ended up going to UVA, varsity wrestler first year, actually medaled in the ACC tournament my first year, but ended up supporting myself, not on scholarship. Dad went broke that first year. And so I paid my way through school.
So did you go to Princeton at all, or no? You were,
no, I never,
before you got there, you were diverted to.
I called them and said, "Sorry, I'm going to Virginia."
And how did you pay your way through college?
Say what?
How did you pay your way through college?
Probably playing poker, I must admit.
That's what I want to get to that. But
yeah, I paid, and I would pay my tuition, room and board, playing poker, and I got married after my second year.
How old were you?
As she would say, I'm a terrific ex-husband.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 20.
Wow.
Yeah, and
you were in a hurry, Lyles. You were in a real hurry.
Yeah, between odd jobs, and she was the secretary of the dean of medicine at UVA Health Center, and playing cards. I mean, I helped to develop a different concept for a pizza parlor. I did tax accounting for a smallish consortium down there that I ended up going to work for after school. But yeah, it paid your way. It's you know why you're there if you're paying your way through school.
So is there any truth to rumor that you picked the fraternity you did because you thought you'd be very successful at poker with them?
No, actually, I didn't play poker till I got there. I was a bridge player. I started playing bridge when I was 7 with my parents, and was decent. My partner and I ended up as the alternate pair on the college national team that won the nationals that year. Unfortunately, we didn't get to go to Bermuda because we were the alternate pair. But only when I got to Virginia did I start playing poker. That and gin. I mean, gin was a big game in our house, and that and hearts sort of. But yeah, I was all bridge until then.
But poker became a avocation for you.
Yeah, well, I've done it a little bit.
So what you learned it in college,
Yep.
and you loved it. And then how did you develop your game?
Well, just playing. I played in one. Well, just playing. I mean,
But you weren't playing. You weren't playing Joe next door. You were playing in some.
Well, yes, I was playing around the fraternities, and there was a bowling team that used to come into the pizza place that I developed and was running. And after hours, they'd play, and there was another game in town that would play poker on Friday nights and then go to Charlestown Racetrack on Saturday. I was not the racetrack, but they were terrific. They're the best poker players I've seen, and played one 7 stud table stake, no limit table stakes. And I was just playing that. If I could break even, I was happy because I was getting better. And then over the years, continued to play. And of course, then the Texas Hold'em hold. I had no idea what Texas Hold'em was, but probably a dozen or 15 years ago, I got in with a group that played that. And I've gone off to a few tournaments here and there. So,
is the World Series of Poker one of the tournaments you went off to?
Well, yes, that might have been.
Might have been.
Well, I was.
How many times have you been there?
Well, 3 times in the main event and multiple times in the World Series is 60 plus events.
Yes.
One of the things about it's the main event, and that's a $10,000 buy-in, which is not the biggest buy-in. There are a couple of $50,000 buy-ins out there, and there's the one drop for $1 million. But I was fortunate enough to win my way in 2 of those years with a group that gets together, and it's sort of a satellite of local people. And then one year that I didn't win my way into the satellite, I happened to be in a big game and won enough to decide that was my ante for the main event, which I have not cashed in yet. By the way, I've cashed in other events, the seniors, $1,500 buy-in, this and that, but I've not cashed in the main event.
So what is it about poker that has kept you at it all these years? What does it do for you?
Well, there's both the math part of it, and there are people driven by the math, but it's also the people, and it's sort of reading the people, just in terms of playing the game. But frankly, the groups you play with, you tend to become quite close to. I was just talking to one this morning, and they said, how I've been with that group 22 years. I'm the only, up until real recently, I was the only Gentile to play in an all Jewish game. Great, they're wonderful guys, and frankly, my background at Phi Eph, my fraternity, gave me a little Yiddish and a sense of cards. But we're just really close. That group, we are really close, virtually as close as the 8-pack group was. I play in a couple of other groups that you just get to know the people. It's a little bit of a culture. I don't, frankly, enjoy going to casinos other than if there's going to be a tournament, because you're playing with strangers. There's not a camaraderie. You're just trying to win money, and it's not about just winning money. Back in school, it was, but not now.
So should we start a poker chapter in LGW?
Absolutely. I'm all for that.
You'll be our teacher. And
I'll tell you something. I talked to one of the LGW people, asked about putting on a sort of a presentation. What you learn from poker. I mean, patience, position, assets. There are a lot of different things that are applicable to real life, so to speak, that you sort of pick up at the poker table. But no, I don't know that we're going to start having the LGW annual poker tournament. anytime soon.
So you're in college, University of Virginia, you're wrestling, you're playing poker, you graduate. And then what brought you back here?
I had gone the entrepreneurial route. I turned down an opportunity to go with a big bank, Boeing and some others. I was a finance major and I did well in finance. But I had been doing this tax accounting and some other kinds of things for this smallish conglomerate. They had a leasing company, a second mortgage company, and they were developing the old Monticello Hotel as the second ever condo project in Virginia. They were going to wrap a Hilton Convention Center around it, mixed use, 250 rooms, 750 seat convention center, which would have been the second largest in Virginia, and retail. So a real mixed use development almost before its time.
Lyles, I've got you frozen.
As their controller, and then somebody had to take over because we decided to run the hotel. We're gonna it's a thriving restaurant, and they were going to convert it from the top down. It was sort of a resident hotel, and so somebody to run the place while we were doing that. And the fellow that sold it to us, a wily old guy, was stayed on as a consultant, and he sort of mentored me through this. And that led me into the hospitality world. I ended up with a group that did a place called GD Graffiti's up in Rockville that was wildly successful. This big speakeasy.
I remember that.
Yeah, well, I was a big chunk of the concept behind it, and that led other people to come to me to say, "Will you do this same kind of thing as well?" And largely themed restaurants. And I ended up in Austin, Texas. I created the first independent discotheque in Austin, Texas in 1975. But it was horrible for family. I was working 100 hours a week. I was traveling all the time. And I had shares in the properties. I gave them all back just to get out of it, just to try to stabilize life. At 26, okay, you can make money again some other way, but family is important. And I came back here and got into the business I'm in now, which is executive search. This is in 1976.
And how did you leave hospitality? I mean, I know you told that you left hospitality, but what drew you to executive search? And how did you know the people to connect with?
My father, who had gone broke, was signed on with it, had signed on with my partners, Bill and Brian McCormick, as an account executive. And he was very successful working with people in the brokerage industry. He knew Jimmy Lemon and George Ferris, and they were all contemporaries. And so he called Jimmy and say, I can help you. And off they went, right? And so he was doing that successfully. I had a layover, like a 4-hour layover at National. So I zipped over to see my father. They were in Roslyn. And I said, I'm just not really happy. I need to do something else. And, they said, well, okay. The financial people said, well, you were top of your class in finance. By the way, behind 13 accounting majors, I will tell you. Virginia was the Arthur Anderson finishing school at the time. So we can get you a job as an assistant controller. And I said, candidly, for this one organization I'm doing a bunch of consulting with, I sort of function like a vice president of finance. There's a controller who reports into me, and if there are assistant controllers that report to him, I don't know who they are, and I don't want to be one. What's your next idea? And they said, you see that empty desk over there? It's got a phone on it, and we'll give you $25 a day as a draw against a straight commission if you can figure out how to use that phone. And it sounded good to me. And off we've gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story.
I don't know.
And you've been there ever since. I mean, you've been doing this.
Well, nobody else will hire me. I mean, and it's been, my partners have been tremendously supportive. I mean, I was very successful eventually in this business. but once you get to a certain level, you get enough income and this and that. What's really important, right? And to me, what was important was what I'm going to do in the community, how I'm going to impact the community, right? And this, this it starts to dovetail with, okay, I got involved in the Board of Trade and involved in various committees and fundraising efforts and this and that. And so now I want to be involved otherwise. And so, and my partners and frankly, Sarah, my wife, have always been very supportive of this. They haven't said, we need you to bill more. It's sort of, we're happy with what you're doing, regardless of whether it has any kind of return to the company. And we've never thought in terms of that, candidly. I just sort of got involved where I thought I could make some kind of a difference. Or, and you'll hear this again, I found myself in places where I could make a difference, and specifically not just another body. And I don't think I got there by happenstance. I'm big on a higher power, and I think that I was at that space, at that at that place, at that space in time, when I could connect some dots and move an initiative forward. And that's always been the important thing. And like I say, my everybody around me has always been tremendously supportive of that. I'm not sure.
Well, we've got the audience is sort of craving some stories from your LGW days. Before I do that, Nikki Gordon wants you to teach her poker. I think we will do that. I think we should set up a poker night with you, and you could just instruct us all. I think that'd be fascinating. That'd be a good time. So anyway, but Pedro Alfonso says, what about the time when you and the Six Pack went all in as the Temptations and pulled it off better than the rest of us going as the Beach Boys?
Thank heavens, it was the Four Tops and the Beach Boys. And thank heavens this videotape has been lost to time, because this was in a different era of potential trust and frivolity. But we had the four black guys, and we had a talent show, and the four black guys dressed as the Beach Boys, and they did whiteface and blonde Prince Valiant wigs, and none of them had Hawaiian shirts, so I had to loan them all Hawaiian shirts, which I had too many of. And the four white guys were the Four Tops, and you can imagine that we definitely overdid it. The whole part, ruffled shirts, gold chain, the whole bit, and we did a battle of the bands. And so the Beach Boys started playing Little Surfer or something, and their whole move was sort of bobbing up and down, sort of this little insipid kind of thing. And at which point the Four Tops came dancing out to Heard It Through the Grapevine, I think was the case, and sort of shoved them aside as we did our rendition, lip synced of Reach Out, I think. And so they then shoved back with whatever other insipid Beach Boys song. And eventually the eight of us in a chorus line, sort of doing this choreographed Temptations-like thing and, dancing off together. And
Glenn Howard has asked about your Elvis impersonation.
Which I didn't hear.
Glenn Howard has asked about your Elvis impersonation.
Oh, well, that's so
good. Don't forget that. So he said it was memorable.
This is so crazy. I actually did this for LGW at one point. We my wife and her friend Henrietta Burke were chairs of the 125th anniversary of the Alexandria Hospital Foundation, now Inova. And they decided to do a sock hop. And the hubcaps were going to be the band. And so Sarah decked me up. They had poodle skirts, that kind of thing, and the car hop tops, that kind of thing, right? And she had a seamstress do a mock-up of the suit that Elvis wore in Viva Las Vegas. So gold lame tuxedo, his had rhinestone collars and cuffs. Mine were only sequined collars and cuffs. But there it was. And so there I went off as, in this suit, which, by the way, the hubcaps tried to buy from me because they thought it was nicer than the one they had, which Sarah wasn't about to have happen. But what Glenn remembers is that I emceed the gala for Jubilee Housing at one point. And Jack Kemp was going to be an honoree, and I was going to sit beside Patty Rouse. But lo and behold, I'd gotten a call, or Sarah had gotten a call earlier from a woman in her, I think it was a garden club or something, and they were going to do a gala. And she said, "I hear your husband's an Elvis impersonator," which once Sarah stopped laughing, she was appalled and shocked that this would get around. And they wanted me to come and stand beside a T-Bird, which was their show house, and have pictures taken. And I said, "Well, I might be able to do it, but I got another gig later." The Jubilee Housing thing, I can come for like 45 minutes. And I decided I better get the whole wig and glasses and things, which I did. And so I called Jubilee and I said, "Can I come basically as Elvis?" And they said, "Hey," this was the garage sale gala, and it was sort of funky anyway. And I sat right beside Patty Rouse, who knew me well and didn't recognize me the whole time. And here I am giving Jack Kemp as Elvis this award. But that suit got a lot of use.
So are you wearing that on October 12th? You're going to come in with Elvis then?
Sarah says that suit has long since been retired. There are pictures somewhere, but we're not getting.
Oh, and it's framed in your room somewhere, is it? Come on, you got to tell us that.
I can't quite let go of it entirely. We actually borrowed it. Mary Frances Wayne's husband, who's an LGW.
Oh, no kidding.
Is borrowed it for something at some point. Oh yeah.
Let's talk about the future of LGW. We got a couple questions from Glenn Howard again and from Mahan Tabacoli. Basically, how do you believe that LGW can achieve its purpose even better and fill the regional leadership void in the years to come? And what's sort of the most daunting challenge obstacle to LGW achieving its purpose?
Well, okay. So now we get to all this rest of this has been frivolous, frankly. Anything about
no, it was very interesting. It was very exciting.
But the important part is LGW and realizing its promise. It's not just purpose, but it's promise. And I think that over the last 8 or 10 or a dozen years, we've been very thoughtful about bringing people that needed to be at the table to the table and to the organization. Candidly, you coming in, I think a big part of it. I think Tim Kahn did a terrific job. But LGW should be the honest broker for the region. There isn't an agenda here, right? So, I mean, the Board of Trade should, and the Northern Virginia Chamber and other chambers should rightly be focused on the voice of business, which, if it's smart, motivated self-interest, is also looking at what's good for the community, right? But whether it's other business organizations or even things like the Community Foundation, when we're talking about bringing people together, I mean, if we're going to move forward, we've got to do it cross-sector. We've got to have the blend of all the rich culture and ethnicities and vocations and everything that LGW is, in the room and at the table. And so, to me, it should be. I helped to found the Community Foundation in Alexandria, and candidly, when something needs to get done in the city, the mayor will connect with the head of the Community Foundation and say, "Pull us together. Let's get together and focus on whether it's the Resilience Fund for COVID, whatever it is, and to become the central community driver." That's now led by Heather Peeler, who's one of our graduates, our members, and that really ought to be when we need to convene all the diverse voices and organizations to focus on a problem. It ought to be Leadership Greater Washington, because it's got access to all the leaders. It's not an agenda other than what's best for the people in this region. And I think we're getting there. I think you coming in, the seat right at the table as comparable to, for instance, the Board of Trade and other key organizations, and the kind of leader that we're seeing. I mean, we're looking at the people who truly have the resources. They're in policy-making positions, right? And if we're going to bridge all the divides, if we're going to figure out, if we're going to bridge the political divide, the racial divide, the economic divide, who's going to do that, right? And that, for our region to come together, because we're such a disparate region, right? We've got a commonwealth, a federal district, a state, with different leadership, different governance structures. Everybody's got an agenda. We're sort of nonpartisan. We don't have that agenda other than what's good for the region. So I think that's the promise. And through that, empowering our members to utilize this network. I mean, I'm candidly, I'm not looking for Leadership Washington as an entity or Leadership Greater Washington to do something any more than I'm looking for the phone company to do anything other than maintain the network that allows me to make connections. But part of that, though, is reaching out through the connections the organization has to bring the people together, who then it's those people, those groups who will carry it forward in terms of addressing those issues. And that's whatever the issue is, whether it's housing, homelessness, healthcare, issues of diversity and equity. That's what I think Leadership Greater Washington is about and can be more.
What do you see as the obstacle to doing that? What's the challenge in front of us?
Well, you've got to have the resources to do it. You've got to have the commitment by the right people. If we're going to have leaders, the leaders who command the most resources, and that's not just funding, that's constituencies, whatever it is, then they've got to be fully committed at the table. This can't be, I checked this box on my resume, right? I jumped in, I did the program, I met some people, I now can put Leadership Greater Washington, and I'm going to go off and do other things. I think they have to be infected. It's interesting. I used to do the opening talk to Leadership Arlington. I happen to be on the founding board for Leadership Arlington, now the Leadership Center for Excellence. And I looked at the people and I said, candidly, this program year is the down payment on a commitment of the community that you're going to pay off over the course of the next 20 years through your service to this community, for having had the opportunity to experience this program and to connect with each other. And so I think people have to fully commit. I think they have to be willing to accept each other honestly, and not, we all have differences, and let's face it, I screw up more than my fair share. But when I don't understand, except that it's not for malice, it really is the trust fall. If you've been through Leadership Greater Washington, I trust you and I trust your motives to start with. And from there, we can start to build understanding. And if we disagree on something, we can talk about it and work it through. And without putting our personal selves aside. It can't be what's in it for me, what's in it for us. Well, it can't be what's in it for each of us individually, but what's for the good of the other person, and more broadly, what's the good of the region. And I think that spirit has to be there, and staking out a position, as I'm now thinking out loud, staking out a position and digging into that position is what will halt that progress. Because you don't then move from that position. I mean, heck with it. Look at our Congress, right? Look at the political sector today, right? It's my way or no way. And So there's no attempt to understand or to come together to compromise. And the old Harvard negotiation project book, Getting to Yes, how do we get to yes? And a lot of that has to come with what's in the best interest of somebody else, not us. And who cares about the credit? I mean, my whole thing is I'd much prefer not to have my fingerprints on anything, because if I'm trying to take credit for it, then there's some perception that I've got some kind of agenda behind it.
Well, Lyles, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation, very enlightening. Really enjoyed hearing your personal history. And for those of you who are watching us, please remember that you can see more of this in person on October 12th at the Grand Hyatt, Washington, for our celebration of leadership honoring Lyles Carr and celebrating LGW's 35th anniversary. So, and I can't think of a better person to pick for Leader of the Years than you, Lyles. I mean, all the work you've done for LGW and what you have, who we are today is in large part due to your efforts on our behalf over these 35 years. So thank you for that.
I get the last word because I can think of dozens,
Yes,
if not hundreds of people who would be much better beneficiaries. It is an unbelievably humbling thing. And like I say, no small bit of embarrassment, but at the end of the day, it's how do we celebrate the members of this organization and their leadership in our communities and the leadership of this unique organization. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I like I say, talking about me isn't the highlight. I hope people will focus on.
we had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And please, if you have a picture of you as Elvis, can you please send it?
There is no way you're getting a picture of me and that Elvis out there.
Anybody out there who's got a picture of Lyles as Elvis, please send it our way. We would love that. Well, Lyles, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. And remember, October 12th, Grand Hyatt, Washington, the celebration of leaders honoring Lyles Carr. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Lyles.
Thank you. Bye now.